All right, so we are checking our answers on our worksheet. It's 5-5 with solving with square roots and completing the square. We have negative numbers, so that means we're going to have some imaginary numbers. So take a look and let's see what we need to talk about. It is important that any numbers that break out of the square root are put together by multiplication. I should come after your integer, then if you have an I, and then your square root. All right, here are the next couple. So in the first set, 1 through 6, all you were doing was breaking a root down. So if it was negative, it stays negative. We're not solving, so you don't have that plus or minus. But when you get into 7 through the rest of the worksheet, we're solving using square roots or completing the square. That's when the minute you take that square root, so you isolate, you subtract 5, you divide by 9, deal with the fraction if you have to, then as soon as you take that square root, you do the plus or minus. Okay, you can have the answer written separate. I pretty much just have it written like this. All right, a couple more with square roots. So what they have is two separate answers. I put it together with the plus or minus. And then we jump into completing the square, which was a nice review of completing the square. Some more practice with it. All right, so, okay, so let's talk about number 4 here. I'm going to leave my -2, and I'm going to break this down to the 4 and the 2. So square root of 8 breaks down. I get -2 times 2 times the square root of 2. So there's no I in this answer because there is no square root of a negative. A negative number is just a negative number, okay? When I look at number 6, I see that there is a square root of a negative, so I know I'm going to have I. Leave your -3, break that down to -1, and then 16. So it's -3 times I times the square root of 16, which I really meant to write that as a 4. So it's -3 times I times 4, and then you're treating I just like you treat X. So take your -3 times 4, there's my -12I. Okay, so don't make those harder than they are. It's really the only extra step is breaking out that square root of -1, and we know the square root of -1 is I. There was one other thing I told you needed to know. What is I squared equal to? -1. Yep. Those are our two facts. We haven't used the I squared equals -1 much, but we will get into it in another section. Okay, so I was asked about number 7. I need to isolate just the x squared. I want to get rid of the 5 and the 9. Get rid of addition and subtraction first, so subtract 5. That gives me 9x squared equals what? -64. Okay, I don't want to jump in and take the square root. You could, and you'd have 3x. But if that wasn't a perfect square, you'd be stuck. And a lot of people make that mistake. So please, please, please isolate it, even though it doesn't work out nicely. So I have x squared. First thing I'm going to try to do is reduce it. If it doesn't reduce, I'm stuck with it. And actually, I'm okay that I'm stuck with it. Do you see why? Aren't they both perfect squares? So square root, I get x equals plus or minus. And then I have the square root of a negative. That's really going to be -1 and 64. And that's going to be the square root of 9. So here's I times 8 all over 3. So how do I write it? 8I over 3. Or you could have plus or minus 8/3 I. The big thing is that I cannot be in the denominator. It can be up with the numerator, it can be off to the side. It cannot be in the denominator. It cannot be underneath the square root sign. Does that help? All right, let's flip it over. Number 9. So first things first, let's subtract this. I think a lot of people made this problem harder than it was because they didn't reduce their fraction. Divide by 6. You're not taking the square root of 6 over there, so divide by 6, and I get a squared equals. And this is what I'm talking about. Why aren't we reducing our fractions? I know it's going to give you a mixed number in your calculator. Honestly, guys, we're in Algebra 2, we should see that these both divide by 2. Divide by 2, negative 49, divide by 2, 6. In the calculator, you would type in, you can keep your negative sign if you want, negative 98 fraction 6. If I hit enter, it does reduce it. Some of you have to hit simplify. That's a mixed number, so change it back. We all have a key that changes it from improper to mixed or mixed to improper. There's my negative 49 over 3. Now, there is an issue with this, but that right there made it already a lot easier, okay? Now, when I come in to take the square root, I'm going to start with my a equals plus or minus, and then I'm going to break this down as a negative 1 and a 49, and down here is the square root of 3. Okay, the top's really nice. It's I times 7 or 7i. There is an issue. You can't have a fraction underneath the square root sign because that means that you have a square root in the denominator. We cleared up the numerator, that's nice. The denominator has to be rationalized. So this goes back to our basics. How do I get rid of a square root? I square it. So in the top, it is just going to stay as 7i times the square root of 3. And what is my denominator? It should just be 3. Because this is the square root of 9. And the square root of 9 is 3. Now, be really careful here. The only thing that can reduce is the 7 and the 3, or if I had to break my root down. You cannot cancel these 3's. That's what your answer should look like. The I should never be underneath the square root. It should always be your integer, your I, your square root, and then that guy down there. Okay? All right. 13. I am completing the square. So when I complete the square, I need x to have, or a to be 1. I need a b to complete the square, and this is where we prep it, and it looks like this. So a has to be 1, and the rule is to take b divided by 2 and square it and add it to both sides. So first I'm going to subtract 94, and I get x squared plus 8x. I'm going to leave a little space, equals what? Negative 100? Okay, what am I adding in? Well, a is 1, so I'm taking 8 divided by 2 and squaring it. So 4 squared is 16. Guys, I keep saying it. 3 reasons this should be easy to factor. 1, a has a 1 here. So factors of 16 add up to 8, 4 and 4. 2, it's a perfect square. And 3, you already know what it factors with, a 4. So it should be x plus 4, x plus 4, x plus 4 quantity squared. I feel like this is a point where I told some of you you're chasing your tails. You do this, and then you know how to do this, and then you just start doing all kinds of crazy. Moving things, doing things. This whole point of making this perfect square, the whole point of squaring that is to factor it as a perfect square. So that's why you did that. And then we put this together, and what do I get? Negative 84? Is that correct math there? Okay. Come in, and how do I get rid of that square? I take the square root, and so I don't forget it, I'm going to put my little what? Plus or minus there. I'm going to have an I in my answer. I think the big thing is we need to break up our 84. Well, I know 4 goes into how many times? 24 or 21 times? Is that true? 84 divided by 4, 21? Okay, well, how do I know 4 is the best perfect square? I could try other numbers, but are there any perfect square factors stuck inside 21? So that's my best. So this would be I times 2 times square root 21. So that would be plus or minus 2i square root 21. So if this helps you, do it off to the side. The only new thing is the square root of negative 1. And honestly, I think that's the easiest part of all this now. Like that should be boom. I know I have that I. To finish it, we're going to subtract 4. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus 2i square root 21. That is it. You cannot go further. Don't do all of that advanced math and then make a dumb mistake, which happens. Maybe I shouldn't say a dumb mistake, but I know you know better. You can't add negative 4 and 2. That's not a 2. That's 2i square root of 21. These aren't like terms. That'd be like adding negative 4 and a 2x. Are we clear on this? Like you're stuck here. You're stuck with this answer. Okay, do you still need 15? Yeah? Okay. So first I'm going to prep it, add 54. So I get p squared minus 4p plus something. Oh, heck, I don't even get a negative on this one, huh? So I don't think I'm going to have an I in here. I'm going to take my negative 4, divide it by 2, and square it because the a value is 1. So that's negative 2 squared. I like to show that. My perfect square is 4. So how does this factor? P minus 2 and P minus 2. If you want to write them out side by side and double check it, that's fine. And that equals 64. So this one didn't even have an imaginary number. This was old school. So we can do a little more with this. I'm still going to jump in and take my square root. And this is an easy one to think about this. What squared gives me 64? A positive 8, but also a what? Negative 8. It's a little more abstract way to think about imaginary numbers. But negative 8 times negative 8 is 64. That's why I'm getting those two answers. Now I'm not done. Don't I have to add 2? And I do see issues with this because I have people who add 2 and then say plus or minus 10. You have 2 plus 8, which is 10, but what else do you have? 2 minus 8, which is what? That's where they got these two separate answers from. I think some people are waiting to put the plus or minus sign at the end, but it's when I take the square root. That leads me to what squared gives me that, and that's why I have those two different answers.